Imagine waking up tomorrow morning to breaking news from the American Southwest. One of the most famous engineering structures ever built has suffered a catastrophic failure. Hoover Dam, a massive wall of concrete that has stood for nearly a century, has collapsed. Within moments, billions of gallons of water begin moving downstream. Emergency alerts are sent across multiple states. News helicopters rush into the sky. Social media explodes with videos and speculation. Millions of people ask the same question: what happens next? To understand the scale of such an event, we first need to understand what Hoover Dam actually is. Rising more than 700 feet above the Colorado River, Hoover Dam is one of the most recognizable pieces of infrastructure in the world. Completed in 1936 during the Great Depression, it was considered one of the greatest engineering achievements of its era. Thousands of workers helped build a structure so large that it changed the future of the American Southwest forever. Behind the dam sits Lake Mead, one of the largest reservoirs in the United States. This enormous body of water stores a critical supply used by cities, businesses, and agricultural regions throughout the Southwest. Millions of people indirectly depend on the systems connected to Hoover Dam every single day, whether they realize it or not. The dam also generates hydroelectric power. Massive turbines hidden inside the structure convert the force of moving water into electricity. That electricity helps support homes, businesses, and infrastructure across multiple states. For decades, Hoover Dam has quietly performed a job that most people rarely think about. It controls water, generates power, and helps sustain modern life across a vast region of the country. Now imagine that all of it suddenly changes. In this hypothetical scenario, a catastrophic structural failure occurs. Engineers have long considered such a collapse extremely unlikely, but for the purpose of this thought experiment, imagine the impossible becomes reality. A major crack forms inside the structure. Under immense pressure from the water behind it, the damage spreads. Concrete sections begin to fail. Within minutes, the integrity of the dam is lost. Then it happens. The wall that has held back Lake Mead for decades can no longer resist the force pressing against it. An enormous volume of water surges through the breach. The scale would be difficult to comprehend. Unlike a typical flood, this would not be a slow rise in water levels. Instead, an immense wave of water would begin racing downstream through the Colorado River system. The force of that movement would carry tremendous destructive power. Areas closest to the river would face the most immediate danger. As the flood wave moves forward, roads, bridges, and infrastructure located in vulnerable zones could be severely affected. Emergency response agencies would be forced into immediate action. Authorities would issue warnings and evacuation orders wherever possible. Helicopters, rescue teams, and disaster management personnel would mobilize on a massive scale. But the story would not end with the initial flood. One of the largest consequences would involve water itself. Lake Mead functions as a critical storage system. If Hoover Dam were somehow lost, the ability to manage and store that water would be dramatically affected. Cities that rely on Colorado River resources would face significant long-term challenges. Water managers would need to develop emergency strategies to compensate for the loss of one of the most important reservoirs in the country. Agriculture would also feel the impact. Farms throughout the region depend on carefully managed water distribution systems. Any major disruption could create enormous pressure on agricultural production. Water restrictions, emergency planning, and long-term infrastructure projects would likely become necessary. The energy sector would face its own challenges. Hoover Dam generates renewable hydroelectric power used across the Southwest. Losing that generating capacity would force power providers to rely more heavily on alternative energy sources. While modern electrical grids have backup systems and redundancies, the sudden loss of a major power source would still create operational challenges and increased costs. Then there is the economic impact. The American economy depends heavily on infrastructure. When critical systems fail, the effects can spread far beyond the immediate disaster zone. Transportation networks, utility systems, businesses, tourism, and regional industries could all experience disruptions. Recovery efforts would likely cost billions of dollars. Construction crews, engineers, and government agencies would be tasked with addressing one of the most complex infrastructure emergencies in modern history. Financial markets would react. News coverage would dominate headlines. Experts would debate how such an event could have occurred and what steps would be required to rebuild and stabilize the region. For weeks, perhaps months, Hoover Dam would become the center of national attention. Yet despite how dramatic this scenario sounds, there is an important reality that often gets overlooked. Hoover Dam is not an abandoned structure. It is monitored continuously by engineers and specialists. Advanced inspection systems track its condition. Structural experts evaluate the dam on a regular basis. Maintenance projects are carried out whenever necessary. Modern technology allows engineers to identify and address potential concerns long before they become serious threats. In fact, one reason Hoover Dam has remained operational for so many decades is because of the extraordinary level of attention it receives. The structure was designed with durability in mind. Engineers understood the immense forces it would face and built it to withstand those pressures. Over the years, maintenance and modernization efforts have helped ensure that the dam continues to perform its role safely. That is why experts generally consider a sudden catastrophic collapse to be extremely unlikely. However, asking the question remains fascinating because it reveals something important about the modern world. Most people rarely think about infrastructure. We turn on lights. We use water. We drive across bridges. We depend on systems that quietly operate in the background every day. Yet behind each of those conveniences are massive engineering projects that make modern life possible. Hoover Dam is one of the greatest examples. It is more than a wall of concrete. It is a symbol of engineering ambition, human innovation, and the ability to reshape entire regions through infrastructure. For nearly a century, it has stood between the Colorado River and the American Southwest, performing a task so important that millions of people depend on it without ever seeing it. So what would happen if Hoover Dam broke tomorrow? The consequences could be enormous. But perhaps the more interesting lesson is understanding just how much modern civilization depends on structures like this one. Because sometimes the most important systems are the ones we notice only when we imagine them disappearing. And that is exactly what makes Hoover Dam one of the most remarkable engineering achievements ever built.